Rain lashed against the 47th floor windows of the high-rise where Elena Moore lived, each drop tapping out a rhythm that felt like something breaking apart. She stood still, 9 months pregnant, her hands cradling her belly as she stared down at the glowing lights of storm-drenched Chicago. But inside her, something fiercer than the storm was building. The cold silence of a man she once believed was her forever. "I have to go," Christopher Hale said, his voice flat like a quarterly report. "If anything happens, call the driver. I can't miss tonight." Tonight. His big acquisition gala for his expanding hotel empire. Tonight, when the first contractions had already begun to tighten around her body. He turned his back and walked out of the luxury penthouse he once promised would be their home. Elena didn't move. There were no tears, just a quiet collapse. She knew, deep in her bones, that this moment would divide her life in two. Before this night, and everything after. A single thought bloomed in her mind, like a vow. When a woman is abandoned at her lowest, will she break, or will she rise so powerfully that no one recognizes her again? The rain was still relentless as Elena stepped into the waiting black SUV parked beneath the building. Beside her sat the woman who had served the Hale family for over 12 years, a loyal, aging nanny named Maria. Her wrinkled hand clutched Elena's tightly, offering not just support, but silent, maternal worry. Last contraction was only 6 minutes apart, Maria said, her voice hoarse with concern. Elena didn't reply. She only nodded, turning her face away to hide the sting of another kind of pain, one she no longer expected Christopher to soothe. Any fragile hope that he might show up had died hours ago, buried with the last of her illusions. St. Clair's Hospital was hauntingly quiet at midnight. Cold white lights bathed the halls in clinical indifference. No flowers, no husband, no one but Maria, her hands locked with Elena's as they entered the delivery room. Pain came like waves crashing against a crumbling cliff. Elena gritted her teeth, gripping the bed rail, her eyes filling with tears that never fell. Maria leaned close, whispering Spanish prayers in her ear, soft words meant to shield her from the brutal absence of the man who should have been there. And then he cried. "Congratulations, a healthy baby boy," the doctor announced, lifting the slick newborn into view. Elena collapsed backward, trembling, breath ragged, her arms reached forward. "Leo," she whispered, the name she'd carried with her for 9 months. "My son." At that moment, she wasn't abandoned. She was a mother. And that was more than enough. Later, when the room dimmed and nurses retreated, Elena signaled to Maria. "Bring me my phone," she said. "You want to call, Christopher?" Maria asked quietly, a last thread of hope in her voice. Elena shook her head. "No, I'm recording the truth." She turned on the camera, her face was pale, her hair wet with sweat, eyes hollow from pain and exhaustion. On her chest, Leo slept, his tiny hand wrapped around her blouse like he already knew where he belonged. "Hello, my son," Elena began, her voice rough but steady. "Your name is Leo, and I want you to know something." She raised her wrist to the camera, showing the hospital bracelet. Name, birth date, time. 2:13 AM. The moment you entered this world, your father was at a business gala, a party he believed mattered more than meeting his own child. She paused, then said with steel in her voice, "You were not abandoned. You were chosen. By me. He made a different choice." She ended the recording 3 hours later when Christopher finally checked his phone and saw dozens of missed calls from Maria. Elena was gone. Back at the penthouse, he found only a sealed envelope and a birth certificate. Leo Moore. No father listed. Inside the letter, one line, "You chose champagne over your son's first breath, and now you'll live with that choice." On the early morning flight out of Chicago, Elena held Leo to her chest, staring into a clouded sky. No tears, no fury, just one thing left: resolve. Elena left Chicago on a gloomy morning with nothing but a single travel bag holding her passport, Leo's birth certificate, and $37,000, 0 cents, in her bank account. No long-term plan, no clear destination, just the instinct of a mother and the will of a woman who had lost everything except herself. Her first stop was Florence, Italy, a city she once knew during her short study abroad years ago. She had no family, no home, but she had memories, and one old mentor, Signora Valenti, a professor of ecological architecture. "You're no longer Elena Moore," Valenti told her during their first espresso meeting, eyes sharp behind vintage glasses. "If you want to survive, you must vanish. If you want to win, you must become someone no one dares to cross." Elena nodded. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. The next 3 years were a blur of exhaustion and transformation. Elena legally changed her name to Isadora Lenore, choosing a French surname to distance herself from any past trace. She relearned everything: sustainable architecture, smart building materials, green tech. By day, she was a student. By night, a single mother with a toddler. And in between, she built business plans, networked with women-led startups across Milan, Zurich, and Vienna. Every dollar she earned was not just survival, it was foundation. She was building something stronger than anything Christopher had ever owned. Leo grew up in a world where curiosity was currency. Instead of toys, Elena bought him 3D architectural puzzles. Instead of amusement parks, she brought him to recycled material expos. Once he asked her, "Where's my dad?" She smiled. "Your dad was someone I once loved." Leo never asked again. He was sharp enough to know, not every absence deserves an explanation. When Leo turned 4, Elena Iadora launched Lenoir Studio in Switzerland. Within 2 years, it became one of Europe's leading firms in sustainable architecture. Her company focused on green energy, self-sufficient housing, and public projects supporting single mothers. The media called her the Green Phoenix, a woman who had risen from betrayal and built power from pain. She never commented. Her silence was part of the myth. When Leo was 6, they returned to New York for the first time. No one recognized her. No pitiful glances. No shadows of the fragile woman she used to be. Only Isadora Lenoir. Long, dark hair, razor gaze, a walk that made entire rooms pause. She rented a penthouse in Manhattan, 3 blocks from Hale Global's headquarters. Not by accident. Nothing from here on was accidental. Elena knew revenge wasn't about hurting Christopher's heart. It was about cracking his ego, his work, his image, his invincibility. She started showing up at architecture panels, philanthropy summits, and green innovation forums, where New York's elite businessmen always gathered. Whenever she entered, the room noticed. No one knew where she came from, but everyone wanted more. She avoided Christopher, never crossed paths, not yet. Patience was part of her weaponry. She made waves with groundbreaking design proposals and left before anyone could get too close. But most importantly, a formal invitation was delivered straight to Christopher's office. On behalf of Lenoir Studio, we cordially invite Mr. Hale to sponsor the Brooklyn Industrial Renewal Project, an initiative to transform abandoned warehouses into housing for single mothers and displaced children. An offer impossible to refuse. A game quietly underway, and the man who once betrayed her would soon fall for a woman he'd never recognize. October in New York held the crisp edge of autumn, wrapped in golden sunlight, just enough warmth to let old ghosts rise with every footstep. It was the night of the Light Gala, an annual charity event drawing the city's elite from finance, tech, and architecture. Isadora Lenoir entered the grand foyer like a whisper of cold wind. Elegant, composed, but carrying an energy that silenced the room for a heartbeat. A sapphire silk gown hugged her figure, bare shoulders framed by subtle diamonds. Her gaze was steady, her stride unwavering. No one there knew this woman had once given birth alone, and none recognized the man stepping off the elevator, Christopher Hale, as the reason she had once walked through hell. Their eyes met. A flicker of confusion crossed Christopher's face. He stared a beat too long, as though his memory were fumbling through a chapter he didn't remember writing. "Christopher Hale," she said, extending her hand. "Isidora Lenoir," he replied, taking it, his eyes briefly noting her bare ring finger. "Thank you for sponsoring the Brooklyn Project," she said, her voice soft but firm, every syllable a calculated thread pulling at his pride. "You're making me think. I should have doubled it." He smiled, already drawn into a maze he didn't realize led backward into his own past. Throughout the evening, Isidora stayed just close enough to be noticed, yet distant enough to remain elusive. She never mentioned family, she never spoke of children, and not once did she allow even a single memory of Elena Moore to surface. But she left traces. The cocktail she ordered, bourbon neat, exactly as Elena used to drink it, to the jazz tune she requested from the band. Autumn Leaves, the same one that played the night of their engagement. And Christopher, though unaware, began to feel uneasy. "Do you believe in subconscious memory?" he asked during a quiet moment by the balcony overlooking the Hudson. Isidora tilted her head, a subtle smile curving her lips, as though she'd waited for this question all night. "I believe some people live inside us forever, even when we forget their names," she answered, then turned away, leaving him suspended between confusion and unnamed longing. That night, Christopher couldn't sleep. Why was she? Why did he feel nostalgia? Why did her eyes feel like an apology he hadn't yet earned? And most haunting of all, why did his heart beat off rhythm for the first time in years? Meanwhile, back in her penthouse, Isidora removed her earrings and looked into the mirror. She didn't smile, not because she wasn't proud, but because victory like this doesn't need a grin. It only needs truth. This was only the beginning, where the prey walks willingly into a loop he believes is fate, but is in truth a trap, tailored stitch by stitch for 7 long years. And he had just fallen for the very woman he once abandoned. Within 3 weeks of the gala, Christopher Hale had walked headfirst into the web, woven not with seduction, but with sharp intellect, grace, and a kind of quiet power that made Isidora Lenoir irresistible. They had coffee in Soho. They talked about sustainable architecture, urban renewal, and the role of women in public design. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. And that drove Christopher mad. He was used to women chasing him, predictable, eager, dazzled by his empire. But Isidora didn't need him. And somehow, that made him need her more. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he told her one evening on the rooftop of the Gramercy Hotel. Isidore looked into his eyes, her smile cryptic. "So does that make me memorable or dangerous?" Christopher laughed, but deep down he knew this was no longer his game. Soon, Isidore was invited to consult on the Brooklyn Project, formally added to Hale Global's design advisory board, entirely at Christopher's suggestion. She attended meetings, presented strategies, and sketched blueprints for community spaces. "She blends environmental innovation with human empathy," one board member praised. Christopher said nothing. He just watched her, unsure whether he was admiring or being dismantled. Behind the scenes, Isidora infiltrated Hale's smaller subsidiaries, using anonymous shell companies to acquire minor stakes, disrupt cash flows, and delay projects. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but every move was deliberate, timed, untraceable. And Christopher was too distracted, falling in love. On a trip to Vancouver, they toured a biosustainable home. Rain pattered on the glass roof. Christopher reached for her cheek. "I don't understand this," he whispered, "but I don't want to let it go." Isidore smiled slowly. "Sometimes the things we don't understand are the only things that are real." And that was their first kiss, measured, electric, a kiss between a man unknowingly refalling for the woman he once left behind. She took him through places wrapped in old memories, but cloaked in new names. Lunch at Quincy, the new restaurant where their first Italian date once stood, a jazz bar playing Moon River, their wedding song. a quiet walk past St. Clair's Hospital. "I came here once," she said, "on a rainy night, a night that changed everything." Christopher froze. He said nothing, but something inside him cracked. The turning point came at a gifted children's science fair, where Leo waited. 7 years old, calm and brilliant, Leo stood beside a self-powdered generator. Christopher, walking alongside Isadora, noticed the boy. Those eyes, that face. "You built this yourself?" he asked. "With my mom. She's really smart," Leo replied. "Where is she?" "She's right there," Leo pointed at Isadora, standing quietly nearby. Christopher turned, and for the first time he saw himself in another face. His chest tightened, his throat closed. He said nothing, and Isadora offered no explanation. She let the silence say everything. That night, Christopher sat at his desk and opened the old wedding folder he hadn't touched in years. There she was, Elena Moore. He stared at the photo, and Leo's face appeared again in his mind. And for the first time, he didn't feel confused, he felt afraid. Afraid that he had just fallen in love with the woman he once broke, and that she might never let him recover. But blind love has never been forgiveness, and the truth, when carefully crafted, doesn't need to speak loudly. It only needs the right moment to destroy. And that moment had arrived. That night, all of New York turned its eyes to the Waldorf Astoria, where the prestigious Legacy Ball was being held, an annual philanthropic gala hosted by the Hale Foundation. Christopher arrived in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, carrying a platinum engagement ring custom-made for Isadora Lenoir. He planned to propose during the peak of the evening. Rumors had already leaked to the press. CEO Hale to propose to mysterious architect shaking up NYC. He had no idea he was walking into the stage of his own undoing. Isadora arrived 15 minutes late, like a queen who knows no one dares begin without her. Her black metallic gown shimmered under the chandeliers, commanding every glance. She shook hands with the mayor, exchanged soft words with the founder of a wind tech empire. And finally, she reached Christopher, who stood waiting like a thirsty man in the desert. "You look more beautiful than I imagined," he whispered, gripping her hand. "And you are still as predictable as ever," she replied, softly, slicing him before he even noticed. Midway through the night, Christopher took the stage, giving a speech about compassion, loyalty, and the women who inspire us. He ended with, "And tonight, I want to speak to someone who's made me believe I could begin again." Applause. Spotlight. Cameras turned. Christopher stepped down, pulled the ring from his pocket, and dropped to one knee before Isadora, seated front row. Everyone held their breath, but not out of excitement, because Isadora wasn't smiling, she wasn't moved. She rose, did not accept the ring. Instead, she signaled the MC, "I'd like to borrow the stage for just a moment." She stepped into the spotlight, her gaze sharper than any light. The room fell silent. "Tonight, I won't speak of love," she began. "I'll speak of choices, of a rainy night, and of a child born while the man who should have held him chose wine and $1 million contract." Gasps, whispers. Christopher froze. Behind her, the LED screen lit up. The video played. A shaky camera, shallow breaths, hospital sounds. A pale woman holding a newborn. "Your name is Leo, and I want you to know, your father chose not to meet you the day you were born." The bracelet on her wrist read 2:13 a.m. A baby's cry filled the room, blended with the stunned silence of hundreds. Christopher looked up, the woman on the screen, Elena, the baby's face, Leo. No one moved, no one clapped. Isadora turned to him, using her real voice for the first time. 7 years ago, I was Elena Moore, your legal wife. I gave birth alone while you wore a tuxedo to sign with Dubai. She descended the stage, approaching him. You didn't just abandon me. You abandoned a child. And now you've fallen in love again with the same woman, but under a new name. This time, I end it. Christopher swayed. He tried to speak, but choked. She went on, calm and lethal. I don't want an apology. I want you to remember you loved me twice in one lifetime, and both times you never recognized me. She turned. Silence exploded into noise. The next morning, the video went viral. CEO proposes to ex-wife at gala, unaware she's back to destroy him. Isadora Lenoir, revealed as Elena Moore, woman he abandoned during childbirth. Hale Global stock plummeted 34%. Corporate ethics committees launched probes. Investors pulled out. The board held an emergency meeting. Christopher was forced to step down. Isadora left New York a week later, without a trace. She took Leo to Switzerland, where he began his next term at a top international school. Are you sad to leave it all behind? Leo asked. She smiled gently. No, my son. I didn't leave it. I ended it. Since the night of the fateful gala, Christopher Hale vanished from the headlines but remained a whispered name in the back corners of business gossip. Filed under the fall of the untouchables. He resigned from Hale Global's board. All personal projects were frozen. Investors, partners, even old friends distanced themselves, as if they'd never known the man once called the Midas of international real estate. He left the penthouse, sold his cars, deleted social media. But one thing he couldn't erase was memory. At night, he sat alone in a tiny rental apartment, watching that same video again and again. Elena's eyes as she cradled Leo weren't filled with rage or hate, only disappointment. A quiet devastation, too deep for screaming. And it was that silence that tore him apart. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't need to. The quiet was a mirror, and he saw everything he failed to be. He hired people to track down Isadora, but all he received was a single line from her former assistant. She left nothing, no note, no number, no door left open. He emailed, no reply. He mailed handwritten letters, returned, recipient unknown. He waited for hours in front of Lenoir's studio, hoping to catch a glimpse of Leo, but the office had been sold. The sign removed. She had disappeared exactly the way she entered, without warning, leaving only shockwaves. Christopher had nothing left but time. He reread every old email between him and Elena, scrolled through wedding photos, ultrasound images, their first home together, and for the first time he saw she had always been there. He had simply refused to look. He remembered that rainy night, the one where he chose a tuxedo and champagne over a hospital room. Maria had called 17 times. He'd silenced the phone. It can wait, he had told himself. Now, he would give anything to relive that moment, just to choose not to leave. 3 months later, he received a letter from a law firm in Switzerland. Inside was a drawing by Leo, a greenhouse with 3 figures at the gate, a mother, a boy, and a blank space. In the corner, a child's handwriting read, "Sometimes a house is full even with one less person." No name, no message from Elena. But Christopher understood. It was the ending, not of love, but of hope for forgiveness. He stopped searching. Instead, he moved to the countryside, and he once bought as a student. He converted the small cottage into a soil restoration lab, building micro-ecosystems for sustainable communities. No more million-dollar deals. No cameras. Just quiet atonement. A neighbor once asked, "Who were you before this?" Christopher only smiled. "I was someone who couldn't see what mattered most. Until I lost it twice." And far away, in a peaceful Swiss village, Leo rode his bike along the lake, laughter in the air. Elena, now fully Isadora, stood in the sunlight, watching him with calm eyes. A woman beside her asked gently, "You're not going back? Not even to give him a second chance?" Isadora answered without hesitation, "Forgiveness isn't an obligation, it's a choice. And I've chosen peace over pity." She turned. The wind caught her hair, but her gaze never wavered. Forward, never back. 2 years had passed since the night she exposed the truth under unforgiving lights, and Elena, now fully Isadora Lenoir, was no longer a public name. She declined every interview, turned down book deals, never stepped onto a stage to accept any Inspiring Woman awards. She disappeared from headlines as if silence itself was the greatest gift she gave herself. And perhaps the only true response to a past that once screamed to be heard. Isadora now lived in a small wooden house nestled in the Appenzell Hills of Switzerland, where seasons changed clearly, wildflowers bloomed along streams, and Leo's laughter echoed across the meadows each afternoon. She no longer ran Lenoir Studio daily. The company had been passed to a new team of young women leaders she'd trained herself. She spent her days writing about healing architecture and teaching small retreats for women recovering from heartbreak. She no longer spoke about revenge. She spoke about survival, rebirth, and most of all, choosing to move forward. And in that chapter of quiet rebuilding, she met Marcus Chen, a wildlife photographer from Taiwan who had come to her village to capture rare birds of the Alps. At their first meeting, he asked, "Do you smile often?" She replied, "I forgot how." He said, "Then I'll learn how to help you remember." He knew nothing of her past, nothing of the empire she once rattled, nothing of her marriage, her child, her scars. And for the first time, Isadora didn't want to explain. Not from shame, but because she understood. Real love doesn't require a debt. It only asks to be present. 1 year later, on a late summer morning, Isadora stood in a garden of white daisies, holding a wildflower bouquet. Leo ran to her, hugging her tightly, and whispered, "You're the prettiest today." She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because after everything, she could finally say, "Today I choose myself, not as a survivor, but as a woman reborn." On a grassy hill near a crystal lake, Isadora and Marcus wed in a quiet ceremony, just close friends, former students, and villagers. No press, no champagne towers. There's Leo between them, handing over the rings and whispering to Marcus, "Please don't leave my mom alone." Marcus knelt, looking Leo in the eye. "I came here to stay." Their life afterward wasn't a fairy tale, because Isadora never believed in those. But it was a real life, one made of conscious choice, not fantasy or regret. There were mornings of wind and toast, afternoons of calligraphy and homework, evenings of tea and laughter, and sometimes at night she would hold Leo as he slept, listening to a distant echo. Not pain anymore, but a gentle blessing to her past self. "Thank you for not breaking. Thank you for rising. Thank you for not going back." Somewhere else in the world, Christopher Hale still lived, but quietly. He worked for an environmental nonprofit in Northern Europe. No one spoke of his past, and he never did. In his wallet, he kept Leo's old drawing, faded but never torn. He knew forgiveness would never come, but he learned to forgive himself by living differently, one day at a time. And so the story doesn't end with a kiss or a reunion or a perfect bow. It ends with a woman standing in sunlight, holding her child's hand, eyes fixed on a horizon where no one is behind her anymore. Because sometimes happiness is not being loved again, but knowing you became strong enough to love yourself after it all.